discovered America. Most people were taught that Christopher Columbus discovered America.
Columbus discovered America.
Columbus discovered America.
Columbus discovered America.
Columbus discovered America. When Columbus discovered America.
But standing here on the island of Hispaniola in the Dominican Republic, the historical record tells a much darker story. This wasn't simply exploration. It was conquest, slavery, and one of history's greatest demographic catastrophes. I'm here now in the island of Dominican Republic, on the island of Hispaniola, and I'm standing in front of Diego Colon's palace. Diego Colon being the son of Christopher Columbus. And not far from here is the location where Christopher Columbus himself landed on his first voyage to the New World, the West Indies. What many of you don't know, however, is that Christopher Columbus was not an adventurer. He was not an explorer. He was in fact a conquistador and a Christian extremist. He was a butcher and a genocide enabler, bent on exploitation and conquest under the flag of Christendom. He was a ravenous slave driver and a child rapist who preyed on underage girls from the indigenous peoples that he encountered in this area, namely the Taino. These are documented historical facts found in letters and journals recovered from his expeditions. In one letter, after his first encounter with the Taino peoples, he wrote to the king and queen and described the Taino as the kindest, gentlest, most hospitable people he had ever met. Then he went on to say, a few men with swords and we can make slaves of them all. Columbus himself also wrote in 1500 that there are, quote, plenty of dealers who go about looking for girls. Those from ages 9 to 10 are now in demand. His own companion, Michel de Cunha, who accompanied him on his second voyage, also recorded in 1495 that Columbus gave him a captive Taino woman whom he then admittedly whipped and raped. These are the heroes of Europe, my friends, that raised the Christian flag while forging their new world. And all of their activities were formalized, legalized, and fully sanctioned and blessed by the then Pope and the King and Queen of Spain under the Christian papal bulls, such as the Inter Caetera in 1493. Now, when Columbus landed on the first voyage in 1492, he had three ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and his flagship, the Santa Maria. Ironically, the Santa Maria ran aground on Christmas Day, the day that it landed. But get this, it wasn't his Spanish crew from the other ships who rescued him. It was the very benign Taino people who had just graciously welcomed him. They paddled out in canoes and helped save his crew. Imagine, the flagship was named after the Virgin Mary, Santa Maria, and it got grounded and sank on the reef on entry. Columbus's crew sat by idly and watched their captain and his crew in distress and didn't even go to his help or to his aid. So Columbus, instead of rewarding that kindness from the Taino people, rewarding it with goodness, he returned the following year with 17 ships and over 1,000 colonists and soldiers ready to subjugate and enslave the Taino. So from the very beginning, exploitation, not peaceful coexistence, was already the plan that Christopher Columbus had. He returned in November 1493. Columbus founded La Isabela, the first permanent European settlement in the Americas. It quickly became the center of slavery, conquest, and colonial expansion, and so began their colonial campaign of savagery under the flag of Christendom. Historians estimate that Hispaniola may have had as many as 3 million Taino before Columbus came. Within only a few decades, forced labor, executions, starvation, and colonial violence devastated the population. By 1514, records show only around 32,000 remained. By 1565, there were 200 Taino, according to the official records in Hispaniola. Just 73 years after the landing of Columbus, the population went from 3 million to 200. Subhanallah. They pillaged, massacred, maimed, raped, brutalized the local Taino population to extinction, all in the name and under the flag of the Holy Christian Spanish Empire. There was one glimmer of light, however. 30 years after that first landing, a group of slaves rebelled in the first slave revolt in the Americas against transatlantic European slavery on December 25th, 1521, at the Nueva Isabela sugar plantation, owned by Diego Colon, the son of Christopher Columbus, here in Santo Domingo in Dominican Republic, then called Al Hispaniola. And they chose Christmas Day because they knew the Spanish would be involved in their Christmas celebrations. According to the Dominican oral traditions, two of its best known leaders were Maria Olofa and Gonzalo Mandinga, Muslims of Wolof origin from Senegambia, alongside Moriscos or Moors who had been enslaved and all of them forced into Catholicism while secretly preserving their Islamic identity. The rebels marched across the island seeking to free other enslaved Africans and overthrow Spanish rule. Although the rebellion was eventually crushed, historians recognize it as the earliest recorded slave revolt in the Americas. This pioneering revolutionary rebellion was held by Muslims, and it was the contribution of the liberation spirit of Islam to the most brutal, inhumane institution that the world has ever seen: Christian European slavery and colonialism. So while Christianity forged their vision of the new world by enslaving Africans to fuel an exploitative industry of sugar and cocoa for Europe's insatiable greed and their selfish indulgence, what were the Muslims doing? The Muslims were liberating people's hearts and minds from mental and spiritual slavery, and then combating the most evil and the most darkest chapter of humanity by leading revolts and rebellions towards physical liberation, a legacy that would continue for centuries, in the Mali revolt in Bahia in Brazil, to the Black Power movement of Trinidad and Tobago, and even the civil rights movement in the United States of America. So history isn't only about who built empires, and we know that history is written by the victors. It's also about those who resisted them and resisted these empires, these oppressive empires, while Christian Europe and the Christian European colonial powers expanded their slavery across the Atlantic under royal and papal authority, under the flag of Christendom. Some of the earliest recorded resistance came from enslaved African Muslims who fought for freedom. That chapter as well deserves to be remembered just as much as the voyages of Christopher Columbus.